He was not someone people noticed. Every day, he walked into the large building, bag in hand, and went straight to work. He cleaned rooms, dusted furniture, swept floors, and made sure everything looked perfect. People passed him by, sometimes nodding, sometimes not even that. He had learned long ago that it was better to stay quiet, do his work, and avoid attention. It was easier that way. The building had many rooms. Some were filled with offices, some with old furniture that had been there for years. One day, while moving some chairs to clean the corners, he noticed a door slightly open. It led to a storage room he had rarely visited. Curiosity pulled him in. The room smelled of dust and old wood. Boxes were stacked everywhere, and in the far corner, something caught his eye. It was an old piano. Dust covered every inch of it. The keys were yellowed and a few looked chipped. The bench was faded and worn, but it still had a presence. Even covered in dust, it seemed proud in a quiet, forgotten way. He stopped for a moment. He could feel a strange connection, a memory he could not place. He thought about walking away, but something inside told him to stay. He picked up a cloth and began to wipe the dust from the top. The cloth was rough against the wood, but each sweep revealed the beauty hidden underneath. It was a strange feeling, almost like uncovering a secret that had been waiting for someone to notice it as he wiped. His mind drifted back to his childhood. He remembered a small piano at home, the one he had begged his parents to buy. He had spent hours learning to play, fingers stumbling at first, then gradually moving with confidence. Music had been his world, a place where he could escape everything else. But life had a way of changing plans. His family had needed him to work, to help at home, and dreams of music had slowly faded. He had tucked them away, like the piano he was now cleaning, covered in dust. It's almost forgotten. He ran his fingers over the keys, and without thinking, he pressed one. A soft note echoed in the storage room. It was simple. Not perfect, but it was enough. He pressed another key, then another. A small melody formed, simple, yet full of life. For a moment, the world outside the storage room disappeared. The sound of his music filled the empty space, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Joy, excitement, freedom. He closed his eyes and let his hands move naturally. Remembering the feel of the piano under his fingers, the rhythm of melodies he once knew so well, time seemed to pass differently in that room. Hours could have passed, or maybe minutes, he wasn't sure. He was lost in the music, in memories of a different life. The piano seemed to respond to him, each key pressed exactly as it should, producing the notes he imagined in his mind. The dust seemed less important now, the chipped keys less noticeable. All that mattered was the music. It's the feeling that had returned after so long. When he finally looked up, the room felt different. The dust he had wiped away gave the piano a new shine. But more than that, it felt alive. It was as if the piano had been waiting for someone to remember it, to bring it back to life, and now it had. He stepped back, taking a deep breath, and for the first time in years, allowed himself to smile. Days went by and he could not stop thinking about the piano. Every time he finished his cleaning tasks, he found an excuse to pass by the storage room. Sometimes he would glance at it. Sometimes he would run his fingers over the keys, careful not to play too loudly. He did not want anyone to notice yet. The music was a private thing, a secret part of himself that he was not ready to share. He noticed things about the building he had never seen before. The way the sunlight fell on the floors, the quiet hum of the air vents, the distant sounds of people talking in offices. All of it seemed to slow down when he was near the piano. He began to understand that music had a way of making time stop, allowing him to be fully present in the moment. One evening, the cleaning was done early. The building was quiet, empty, and still. He walked to the storage room and sat on the worn bench. He took a deep breath and began to play. At first it was simple scales, notes running up and down the keyboard. Then he started a melody he remembered from childhood. Something he had learned long ago, but had almost forgotten. His fingers remembered before his mind did, moving with ease and confidence. The music grew louder, more confident, filling the empty room with sound. Somewhere in the building, footsteps stopped. Someone had heard the faint notes and paused to listen, but he did not notice. He was fully in the moment, lost in the music. The piano was no longer old and forgotten. It was alive under his hands, singing with him. The melody changed, moving from soft and gentle to bold and confident. He felt the power of the music in his chest, the way it could lift the spirit, soothe pain, and bring joy. When he finally stopped, the room felt emptier than before. The silence was loud, almost shocking after the sound of the piano. He sat there for a moment, breathing, hands resting on the keys. A sense of peace filled him. For the first time in a long time, he felt whole. The music had reminded him of who he was, of the passion he had buried, and of the dreams he still could follow if he dared. He left the storage room that night with a new energy. Cleaning the building felt different now, lighter somehow. He smiled at people as he passed, even if they didn't notice. The piano had given him something he had lost a long time ago: hope. He understood that he could not let it gather dust again. He would play whenever he could, quietly, privately, until the right time came. In the following days, he found himself thinking of ways to bring the piano into the main hall. He imagined people walking by, hearing the music, and stopping in their tracks. He imagined the surprise on their faces when someone they had never paid attention to played with such skill and passion. The idea scared him, but it also excited him. The piano had given him a voice again, a way to express himself in a world that had often ignored him. He began to clean with purpose, his movements sharper, his mind focused. Every corner of the building became a part of his practice, a path to the piano. He did not know when or how it would happen, but he knew that one day his music would be heard. The old piano, once forgotten and covered in dust, had become his secret, his refuge, and his reminder that sometimes the most beautiful things are found in the places people least expect. He never spoke of it to anyone. No one knew the hours he spent with the piano, the melodies that filled his heart, or the emotions that surged through him as he played. He kept it hidden like a flame that could not yet be shared. But every night, as he dusted the floors and wiped the windows, he carried with him the memory of the notes, the sound of the piano that reminded him of who he was, and the hope that one day the world would hear the music he had kept alive in secret for so long. He had been working in the building for years, doing his daily tasks quietly and carefully. Most people didn't know his name or notice him beyond the occasional nod or brief greeting. Cleaning the floors, wiping the counters, dusting every corner of the building had become a rhythm he followed without thinking. But the piano had changed something. It had awoken a part of him he had long hidden, a spark he hadn't felt in many years. Every day, he found himself thinking about it, imagining the soft notes, the melodies his fingers could create, and the way the sound filled the empty rooms. One morning, he received a simple task. The building was to host a small community event, and the main hall needed to be cleaned thoroughly. As he moved tables and chairs, someone mentioned in passing, "Don't forget to dust the old piano. It's just there for decoration." The words were casual, almost careless, but they made his heart beat faster. The piano he had been secretly loving for weeks, the one that had become his escape, was now part of the main hall. He approached it cautiously, dusting the top gently, careful not to damage anything. The wood was smooth under his cloth, and as he cleaned, he couldn't resist pressing a key. A note rang out, soft and delicate, echoing slightly in the large, empty hall. He froze for a moment, worried that someone had heard, but the hall was empty. He pressed another key, then another, testing the sound. It still worked, and the sound was pure, simple, and familiar. Memories flooded back instantly. He remembered his first lesson on a small piano at home, the hours spent practicing scales, the satisfaction of finally learning a difficult melody. He had dreamed of playing on a stage one day, sharing his music with others. Life had a way of getting in the way of dreams, and he had set music aside. It had been a quiet surrender, one he never spoke about. But now, standing in the hall, he could feel the old thrill returning. He began to play softly. Just a few notes at first, building into a small tune that he had learned long ago. The sound filled the empty hall in a way that felt alive, almost as if the room itself was listening. He closed his eyes and let his fingers move naturally, remembering the melodies that had once brought him joy. Each note felt like a conversation with a part of himself he had forgotten, a whisper from the past reminding him of his talent and passion. He lost track of time. Minutes passed unnoticed, the small melody growing into something more complex, richer, and more confident. He experimented with chords and rhythms, creating a piece that felt entirely his own, yet rooted in the music he had learned as a child. For the first time in many years, he felt free, unburdened by the world outside or the people who never noticed him. In the quiet off the hall, he was alive in a way he had not been for a long time. Later, as he wiped the last bit of dust from the piano, he realized someone had stopped nearby. A janitor from another floor had peeked into the hall, drawn by the sound of the music. He quickly covered his hands and pretended to be dusting, hoping he hadn't been noticed playing. The other janitor smiled faintly, impressed, but said nothing, walking away quietly. The moment passed, but the feeling lingered. Someone had heard him, even if only for a moment, and it gave him a strange sense of courage. After that day, he started making small adjustments to his routine. Whenever possible, he would spend a few extra minutes near the piano, running his fingers over the keys when the building was empty. He began to plan small improvisations, simple tunes that could grow into something more. He imagined the sound reaching the people who visited the building, the surprise they would feel when they heard music coming from someone they had never noticed before. The thought made him both nervous and excited. One afternoon, he was cleaning the hall and arranging chairs when someone suggested moving the piano closer to the center. The idea startled him. The piano, once hidden in a corner, would now be in the spotlight, part of the event setup. He tried to hide his excitement and fear. Moving it would mean exposure, but it also meant an opportunity. He felt his heart race at the thought of playing in front of more people, even if just a few. It was a risk, but a risk he wanted to take. He spent that evening alone, sitting at the piano after the building emptied. He began practicing quietly, experimenting with melodies, adding emotion to each note. Sometimes he smiled at the sound. Sometimes he paused, letting the music guide him. He remembered the joy of playing as a child, the way music could transform feelings, the way it could tell a story without words. This piano, dusty and forgotten by others, was now his teacher, his friend, his companion. The next day, he found small ways to integrate his practice into his work. When dusting the hall, he would linger by the piano, running a chord or two. When arranging tables, he would tap a rhythm on the keys. He became aware of the reactions of those around him. People were curious, glancing at him when they thought he wasn't looking. Some nodded politely, some whispered to each other. He felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. The piano, once a secret, was slowly becoming noticed. One evening, he decided to try something bold. The hall was empty, the lights dimmed. He sat on the bench, took a deep breath, and began to play a piece he had been working on. The music started softly, careful not to fill the room too quickly. Then it grew, moving from gentle notes to bold chords, creating a story in sound. He let the emotion flow, each note carrying memories, hopes, and long-buried dreams. He played longer than he had in years, completely absorbed, losing himself in the melodies that had always been a part of him. Somewhere, someone else stopped and listened. A custodian, a security guard, a visitor perhaps. They didn't interrupt, but their presence gave him a strange sense of connection. The music he had kept hidden was no longer entirely private. It touched someone else, even if briefly, and that realization filled him with courage. He felt a renewed determination to share his gift, to take the risk of being seen and heard. By the time the event approached, he had spent many hours with the piano, refining his pieces, practicing quietly, and building confidence. He felt ready, though he didn't know what form that readiness would take. The piano, once a dusty object in the corner, had become his voice. He no longer saw himself as invisible. He saw himself as a musician waiting for the right moment to be discovered. On the day of the event, he approached the piano with a mixture of fear and excitement. The hall was being prepared, tables arranged, and decorations set. He dusted the piano carefully, touched the keys, and reminded himself that he could do it. The piano would not fail him. he would not fail himself. The old, forgotten instrument had given him more than music. It had given him a reason to step forward and believe in himself again. As he walked away, he took one last glance at the piano. It seemed to shine under the hall lights, waiting, patient, and full of promise. He knew that soon the music would not be his secret anymore. The old piano, dusted and ready, would carry his story into the ears of people who had never expected to hear it. And when that moment came, he hoped it would be the beginning of something new. A chapter where he was no longer invisible. A chapter where his music could speak for him. The night after the hall was prepared for the event, he lingered longer than usual. The cleaning was done, the lights were dimmed, and the building was quiet. It was one of those rare moments when he had the hall entirely to himself. The piano stood in the center, dusted and polished, waiting. He approached it slowly, almost reverently, as if greeting an old friend. Sitting on the bench, he placed his hands on the keys and paused. A mixture of fear and excitement swirled inside him. Tonight he decided he would no longer play just for himself. He began softly, letting his fingers find the notes naturally. The first few chords were tentative, cautious, but soon they grew into a familiar melody. He remembered the tunes he had loved as a child, the songs that had made him dream of performing on a stage. The sound filled the hall, carrying emotion and longing that had been hidden for years. He closed his eyes and let the music guide him, forgetting about the world outside, forgetting about anyone who might be watching. For the first time in a long time, he was completely free. As he played, he became aware of movement at the back of the hall. A few people had remained behind, not wanting to interrupt, but curious about the faint music they had heard earlier. They stopped in the shadows, watching quietly, unsure of what they were witnessing. The man at the piano did not notice them. His hands moved with confidence, creating a melody that felt alive, full of passion and memory. The music seemed to speak for him, telling a story he could not put into words. The audience in the shadows felt the effect immediately. Each note carried emotion so deep it was impossible to ignore. Some of them closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them, while others simply stood still, listening, captivated. The room, which had been filled with ordinary furniture and decoration, now felt transformed. Every sound, every chord, seemed to make the hall come alive. The piano, once forgotten, was now the centerpiece, a storyteller bringing feelings into the space. He did not rush. He allowed the melody to breathe, to move naturally from soft, gentle notes to bold, powerful chords. He experimented, improvising in places where he could feel the emotion rising, letting the music express what he could not say. His face reflected concentration and joy, showing a side of him few had ever seen. The music was not perfect, but it was real, and its honesty resonated with everyone who was listening. After a while, he paused to catch his breath, hands hovering above the keys. The silence that followed was striking. The few people who had been listening held their breath, not wanting to break the spell. One by one, they realized what they had witnessed. A man, noticed for years, pouring his heart and soul into music that seemed to belong to another world. The room felt different now, heavier with emotion, yet lighter with the beauty of what had been shared. He began again, moving through familiar pieces he had learned long ago, weaving in improvisations he had practiced in private. The music was a conversation between his past and his present, a story of lost dreams and rediscovered passion. The notes flowed effortlessly, carrying both sadness and hope. Each chord seemed to fill the room with a presence that could not be ignored. The people watching were drawn closer without realizing it, unable to look away from the scene unfolding before them. As the night went on, his confidence grew. He started exploring rhythms and melodies he had only imagined. He remembered moments from his childhood, lessons learned from music teachers, the excitement of discovering a new tune, and the frustration of difficult passages. All of it came together in a harmony that was deeply personal. His fingers moved faster, then slower, following the rise and fall of emotion. The piano no longer felt like an object. It felt like an extension of himself, a companion that understood his thoughts and feelings. Somewhere in the hall, someone whispered in awe, Another person silently wiped a tear from their eye. The effect was quiet but profound. The music had created a connection, bridging gaps between strangers through shared emotion. The man at the piano had no idea he had an audience. He was lost in his own world, yet simultaneously creating a space where others could feel something powerful and unexpected. Hours seemed to pass in minutes. He played songs from memory, adding his own touch, letting the music tell a story. He could feel the energy in the room, even though he could not see all of his silent listeners. Each note became a testament to the years he had spent unseen, unnoticed, and the passion that had never truly left him. The piano, old and once ignored, had become a vessel for his heart, a bridge from the past to the present. Eventually, he slowed, returning to softer notes, gentle chords that seemed to linger in the air. He allowed the final melody to fade naturally, letting the room absorb the silence. When he lifted his hands, he realized the stillness was absolute. No one moved. The few people who had been watching did not speak. The moment hung in the air, full of unspoken recognition and awe. For a brief instant, the world outside the hall ceased to exist. He finally opened his eyes and saw them. A few people who had been listening, they were silent, their faces reflecting disbelief, admiration, and wonder. They had not expected this. No one had. The quiet man they had passed in the hall, the one they barely noticed, had created something so beautiful, so moving, that it left them speechless. The music had revealed a part of him no one had ever known, and the impact was undeniable. He felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. For the first time, he understood that his music could touch others. The piano, once hidden in a corner, had become a way to communicate without words. He realized that the music was more than a hobby, more than a private escape. It was a gift, something that could reach people in ways that ordinary conversation never could. After a moment, the small audience quietly left, giving him space to process what had happened. He stayed at the piano, reflecting on the experience. The hall felt different now, infused with the energy of what had been played and felt. The piano, old and worn, had once again proven its power, waiting patiently for someone to bring it to life. He touched the keys softly, remembering the notes and the emotions, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. From that night onward, he approached the piano with renewed determination. He understood that music could no longer be something he kept hidden. It was part of him, a voice he needed to share. The quiet moments he had enjoyed alone had given him the courage to play in front of others. The experience had changed him. He began to practice more intentionally, thinking of the day he would play for the event, for an audience, for the world to hear. The building seemed brighter to him now. Each room, each hallway, each corner had a purpose beyond cleaning and maintenance. The piano was a bridge, not just to his past, but to a future filled with possibility. The music reminded him that even when the world overlooks someone, the talent and passion within can still shine. He felt ready for whatever came next, knowing that the piano and his music had the power to transform not just him, but everyone who listened. The day of the event arrived, and the building was buzzing with quiet activity. Tables were arranged, chairs aligned, and decorations set carefully throughout the hall. People began to arrive, filling the space with soft chatter and laughter. The man who had spent so many hours with the piano walked through the hall, making sure everything was in place, dusting, adjusting, cleaning. He did not yet know how to act, how to introduce himself, or how the piano might fit into the day's events. All he knew was that he had practiced, prepared, and hoped for the right moment to share his music. As the crowd settled in, someone noticed the piano. It stood out, polished and shining, positioned near the center of the hall. A few curious eyes glanced toward it, wondering if it would be part of the program. The man stood near it quietly, uncertain if he should speak or play. Feeling the familiar mixture of fear and excitement swirl within him, his hands itched to touch the keys, to fill the hall with the music he had kept hidden for so long. Finally, someone asked, almost casually, if anyone could play the piano during the event. No one stepped forward. The man felt a tension in his chest, a mixture of anticipation and doubt. He took a deep breath and slowly approached the piano. Every step was deliberate, each one carrying the weight of years spent in silence, of music that had never been heard, and of the fear that he might fail. He sat on the bench, fingers hovering above the keys, feeling their familiar texture. The room seemed too quiet in anticipation. He began softly, tentative notes filling the hall, careful not to startle anyone. The audience shifted, realizing someone was about to play. His hands gained confidence quickly, moving from soft notes to flowing melodies. The music was gentle at first, inviting people to listen, to pause their conversations and focus. Gradually, the melody grew richer, stronger, more expressive. The hall seemed to hold its breath, as if it had been waiting for this moment all along. As he played, the audience became captivated. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, drawn in by the emotion carried in each note. The man felt the energy in the room change, a connection forming between himself and the listeners. It was subtle but powerful, a silent agreement that this was a moment worth sharing, a story being told without words. The piano, once forgotten and ignored, had become the centerpiece. Commanding attention not through decoration, but through music and heart, he moved through different melodies, shifting between gentle, flowing passages and bold, expressive chords. Each note carried meaning, a story of years lost, of dreams paused, of passion finally allowed to speak. His fingers moved naturally, guided by instinct and memory, and the hall seemed to respond to every change in tempo and emotion. People were not just listening. They were experiencing, feeling the depth and honesty of someone finally revealing their true self through music. The performance grew more confident as he continued. He began to add improvisations, unexpected flourishes that surprised even himself. The audience, silent and attentive, could sense the uniqueness of the moment. The music was not perfect in a formal sense, but it was real, heartfelt, and moving in ways that polished performances often are not. There was a vulnerability in his playing that made it impossible to ignore. Every note seemed to carry a piece of his life, a memory or a hope, and the listeners responded with attention and emotion. Somewhere in the crowd, people exchanged glances, their faces reflecting awe and admiration. Whispers of surprise rippled quietly, but no one interrupted the flow of music. It was as though everyone present understood that this was a special moment, one that required stillness and respect. The man at the piano did not look up. He could feel the connection, even without seeing it, and it gave him courage. He let the music guide him, moving through emotions, telling stories, revealing himself in a way he never had before. As the piece reached its climax, the hall was completely silent. The music swelled, filling every corner, resonating with the hearts of everyone present. The man could feel the weight of years gone by, frustration, the hidden talent, the private practice sessions finally finding their audience. Each chord was a statement, a declaration that he existed, that his music mattered, and that his voice could be heard. Then, as the final note faded, the silence was profound. The audience did not immediately react. They were absorbing what they had just experienced, processing the depth and sincerity of the performance. The man sat quietly, hands resting on the keys, heart pounding, unsure what would happen next. It was the first time he had played in front of an audience, and the moment felt surreal. Slowly, the hall erupted in quiet applause. Then louder, more enthusiastic clapping. People were on their feet, some moved to tears, others smiling in amazement. The energy in the room was electric, filled with respect, admiration, and wonder. The man at the piano felt a rush of emotions: relief, joy, pride, and humility. He had taken a risk, shared his hidden talent, and the response was overwhelming. The music that had been a private refuge was now a shared experience, touching hearts in a way he had only dreamed of. The audience continued to applaud, some coming closer to look at the piano to see who had created such beautiful music. They noticed him, the quiet man they had overlooked for years, sitting modestly at the instrument that had transformed the hall. The contrast was striking. Someone who had gone unnoticed for so long had created a moment that no one could forget. His eyes met a few in the crowd, and he saw surprise, admiration, and gratitude reflected back at him. It was a validation he had longed for, a recognition that went beyond words. As the applause died down, he realized that something fundamental had changed. The piano was no longer just an instrument, and he was no longer just a quiet figure in the background. Music had given him a voice, and for the first time, he felt seen, acknowledged, and valued. People began to approach him, asking questions, praising his playing, and sharing how moved they had been. He responded with quiet gratitude, still overwhelmed by the experience. The event continued. But his performance left an impression that overshadowed everything else. Conversations lingered on the music, the talent of the man at the piano, and the emotional impact of what they had witnessed. He moved through the rest of the day with a mixture of humility and pride, understanding that his life had shifted in a subtle but powerful way. The music had not just filled the hall, it had opened doors to recognition, connection, and opportunity. When the hall finally emptied and the day drew to a close, he sat at the piano again. This time there was no audience, only the quiet reflection of what had just happened. He played softly, letting the notes carry the emotions of the day, the reactions of the audience, and the validation of his talent. It was a private moment, but different from the nights before. Now he knew that his music had meaning beyond himself. It had the power to move others, to inspire, and to create connection. That night, as he left the hall, he looked back at the piano. It was no longer an object in the corner, forgotten and dusty. It was a partner in his journey, a witness to his growth, and a bridge to a future filled with possibility. He walked out with a quiet smile, knowing that his life had shifted forever. He had faced fear, taken a risk, and shared his music with the world. And in return, he had been seen, heard, and appreciated in a way he had never imagined possible. After the event, life in the building returned to its usual rhythm, but nothing felt the same for him. The performance had changed something fundamental. People no longer ignored him. They greeted him with warmth, curiosity, and respect. Some asked him to play again, while others simply expressed how moved they had been by his music. For him, it was not just about recognition. It was about being seen as someone with a voice, a story, and a gift. The piano, once dusty and forgotten, had become the bridge between his hidden talent and the world around him. He continued to care for the piano as he always had, cleaning it meticulously and playing whenever he had a quiet moment. Each session was different now. He played for himself, but he also played imagining the people who had heard him, the ones whose hearts had been touched. The melodies were richer, more confident, and full of emotion that could only come from experience. From years of hiding his talent and waiting for the right time to share it, word of his performance began to spread beyond the building. Small invitations came from nearby community centers, local gatherings, and even a few radio hosts who had heard about the quiet man who had stunned an audience with his piano. He was hesitant at first, unsure if he was ready to perform for more than a handful of people. But the piano had taught him courage. The first small event he agreed to attend was just a few blocks away. He carried with him the memory of the hall, the faces in the audience, and the sound of his music resonating through their hearts. The first few performances, outside the building, were nerve-wracking. He could feel the eyes on him, hear the quiet murmurs, and sense the anticipation. But once his fingers touched the keys, the nervousness faded. The music became his voice, his confidence, and his story. People listened, captivated by the sincerity, the emotion, and the depth of feeling in every note. His playing was not just about technical skill. It was about connection, honesty, and the courage to be seen. Each performance built on the last. Invitations became more frequent, and slowly he began to realize that his life was changing in ways he had never imagined. He was no longer invisible. People recognized him in the hallways of the building, on the streets, and at local gatherings. They spoke to him, asked questions about his music, and expressed gratitude for the emotions he shared. The quiet man who once walked through life unnoticed had become a source of inspiration and admiration. Despite the growing attention, he remained humble. He continued his work at the building, cleaning and caring for the spaces he had always tended to. The piano remained in its central spot, polished and ready, a constant reminder of how far he had come. He did not seek fame or recognition. He sought connection, the chance to share what had been hidden inside him for so long. Each note he played was a story, a memory, or a feeling, and he cherished the ability to touch the lives of others in such a profound way. The piano itself became a symbol, not just of music, but of hope, patience, and second chances. People who had once walked past it without notice now saw it as a source of wonder and beauty. Visitors, staff, and community members began to gather around it, sometimes quietly, sometimes with admiration, always with respect. The instrument that had been forgotten had found its purpose. Through it, he had found his own. He began mentoring others quietly, helping young musicians who showed potential but lacked confidence. He shared his experiences, his lessons learned through years of practice and patience, and encouraged them to pursue their passions despite obstacles. His story became an example, showing that talent could be hidden for years, but it could still shine brightly when given a chance. He became a quiet leader, a figure who inspired others not through words alone, but through action, example, and music. Over time, his life transformed in subtle, profound ways. Opportunities arose, not as sudden fame, but as meaningful engagements that allowed him to share his music and story. He performed at schools, local concerts, charity events, and small gatherings, always bringing the same honesty and emotion to his playing. His audience grew, not because of marketing or showmanship, but because people felt something real and authentic when he played. They were drawn to the music, to the story, and to the quiet determination of a man who had waited patiently for his moment. Each performance reminded him of the journey that had brought him here. From the dusty storage room to the central hall, from silent practice sessions to audiences moved to tears. He understood the value of perseverance, courage, and passion. The piano had given him more than music. It had given him purpose, confidence, and the realization that dreams could be pursued at any stage of life. He often reflected on the first day. He had dusted the old piano. At that moment, he had never imagined that it would lead to this transformation. Yet, the act of noticing, caring for, and playing the piano had set in motion a series of events that changed his life entirely. He understood now that opportunity often begins with small actions, quiet moments, and the courage to pursue what is important to us. Even as recognition and opportunities grew, he remained grounded. He found joy in the quiet practice sessions, the moments when he could lose himself in the music, and the connections he made with those who truly listened. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It was a companion, a teacher, and a symbol of resilience. Every note played was a testament to the power of persistence, the beauty of rediscovery, and the importance of believing in oneself. His story inspired others quietly. People who had felt overlooked, invisible, or unsure of their talents found hope in his journey. They saw that even after years of being unnoticed, it was possible to reclaim passion, express oneself, and make an impact. The man who had been asked to dust an old piano had found not just his voice, but a way to touch the lives of many, leaving a legacy of courage, humility, and the enduring power of music. As the years passed, he continued to play, teach, and inspire. The piano remained in its central place, cared for, polished, and ready for the next story to be told. People who had once ignored him now saw a person of substance, skill, and heart. The music he created continued to move audiences, remind them of the beauty in simple, honest expression, and show that every hidden talent deserves a chance in the quiet moments after performances. When the applause faded and the hall emptied, he would sit at the piano and reflect. He thought about the journey, the risks taken, and the courage to reveal what had been hidden for so long. The music that once echoed in solitude now carried far and wide, touching hearts in ways he had only dreamed of. Through the piano, he had reclaimed his life, found his voice, and created a story that would resonate long after the final note had been played. Months had passed since the first time he played the piano for the audience in the hall. The building no longer felt ordinary to him. Every corner, every hallway, seemed to carry memories of that moment when he stepped into the light through music. Life had changed, but it had done so quietly, in a way that felt natural and unforced. He continued his work as before, cleaning floors, arranging furniture, and caring for the space. But now, with a sense of purpose and confidence that had been missing for years, the piano had become a constant in his life. He no longer needed excuses to play. Early mornings, late evenings, or quiet moments between tasks, he would sit at the keys and let the music flow. Each session was different. Sometimes he played simple melodies that brought comfort, and other times he improvised complex compositions, testing the limits of his creativity. The piano, once dusty and forgotten, had become a canvas for his expression, a way to translate emotions too deep for words. People continued to notice him, but now with curiosity and respect. Some asked him to play for small gatherings, birthday celebrations, or local events. Others simply stopped by, listening quietly, inspired by the honesty in his music. Every time he performed, he felt a deep connection with those who listened. The music was no longer just about him. It had become a bridge, a language through which he could communicate emotions, experiences, and stories that words could not convey. He began to reflect on how far he had come. From the dusty storage room to the center of the hall, from playing alone to performing for audiences, his journey had been gradual, filled with small steps that added up to a remarkable transformation. Each practice session, each quiet moment with the piano, had prepared him for the moments that mattered. He understood now that talent alone was not enough. Courage, persistence, and belief in oneself were just as important. With his confidence growing, he started exploring new opportunities. Local schools invited him to give demonstrations, community centers asked him to conduct small workshops, and nearby art organizations expressed interest in collaborating. He approached each opportunity carefully, unsure at first, but gradually finding joy in sharing his gift with others. The quiet man who had once been overlooked had become a teacher, a mentor, and an inspiration.